They say karma has no deadline. For Reese Miller, a woman who had spent 40 years on her feet serving coffee to strangers, the deadline seemed to have passed her by. She was 62, alone, and exactly 3 days away from being homeless. She sat on her rotting porch, waiting for the sheriff to come and put her things on the curb. But when a sleek, black Phantom Rolls-Royce pulled up onto her cracked driveway, Ree didn't think it was a miracle. She thought it was the police coming to arrest her. She was wrong. The man who stepped out wasn't a cop. He was a ghost from 2009, and he was holding a receipt stained with ketchup that was worth $40 million. This is the story of how a $6 grilled cheese sandwich changed history. November 14th, 2009, 11:15 p.m. The rain in Akron, Ohio, doesn't wash things clean. It just makes the grime slicker. That night, the sky was the color of a bruised plum, dumping freezing water onto the asphalt roof of the Griddle, a roadside diner on East Market Street that smelled permanently of burnt onions and floor wax. Reese Miller checked the clock for the fourth time in 10 minutes. It was a buzzing neon circle that hummed louder than the refrigerator. She adjusted her apron, the strings digging into a waist that had thickened over 20 years of eaty food that was meant to be thrown away. At 32, Ree felt 50. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a fraying scrunchie, and her orthopedic shoes were the only expensive thing she owned. Hey, princess. Less staring at the clock, more wiping down the counter. I'm not paying you to meditate. The voice grated against Reese's spine like sandpaper. It belonged to Big Ed Kowalski, the owner of the Griddle. Ed was a man shaped like a thumb with a temper shorter than his neck. He sat in the back booth, the one reserved for the boss, counting the till from the lunch rush, his greasy fingers snapping every bill. I'm on it, Ed, Ree said, her voice raspy. She sprayed the laminate counter with blue disinfectant, wiping away the sticky rings left by coffee cups. Her mind wasn't on the counter. It was on the envelope, tucked into her purse in the locker room. The envelope was from the landlord, Mr. Henderson. It was pink, which seemed cruel for an eviction warning. She was 2 months behind. Her ex-husband, Gary, had skipped town 3 weeks ago, taking the savings, the TV, and, strangely, the toaster, leaving Ree with nothing but a maxed-out credit card and a broken radiator in November. She had $14.50 in tips in her pocket. She needed $600 by Friday. The diner was empty, saved for old man Jenkins in the corner, nursing a coffee he'd bought 3 hours ago. The jukebox was silent. The only sound was the relentless drumming of rain against the plate glass window and the sizzling of the grill where the cook, a silent chain-smoking man named Arthur, was scraping off carbon buildup. Ree looked out the window. The streetlights created blurry orange streaks on the wet glass. She felt a profound sense of hollowness. It wasn't just the poverty. It was the invisibility. She was a waitress. She was the person you looked past to see the menu. She was the hand that refilled your water, not a human being with a story. If nobody comes in by midnight, I'm closing early, Ed shouted from the back, not looking up from his cash. And don't think I'm paying you for the full shift, Ree. You clock out when the door locks. Understood, Ed, she muttered. She walked over to the window, pressing her forehead against the cold glass, closing her eyes. Please, she prayed to a god she hadn't spoken to in years. Just give me something. A busload of tourists, a generous drunk, anything. She opened her eyes. There were no tourists. There was no drunk, but there was movement in the alleyway across the street. Two shadows detached themselves from the brick wall. They were small. They moved with the skittish, jerky movements of stray cats. They darted across the four-lane road, ignoring the crosswalk, splashing through puddles that were ankle-deep. Ree squinted. As they got closer to the neon light of the dino sign, the shadows resolved into figures. Children, two of them, a boy, maybe 12 or 13, and a girl who looked no older than 7. They weren't dressed for Ohio in November. The boy was wearing a hoodie that was 3 sizes too big, the sleeves soaked and dragging. The girl was wearing a denim jacket with no buttons and a pair of pajama pants tucked into rain boots. They stopped right outside the door. Ray saw them hesitate. The boy looked up at the sign. Open 24 hours. He looked at the girl, who was shaking so violently her teeth were probably chattering, though Reese couldn't hear it through the glass. He said something to her, pulled her hood up, and then, with a look of terrified determination, he pushed the glass door open. The bell above the door jingled. A cheerful sound that felt entirely wrong for the 2 ghosts who drifted in. A gust of wind followed them, blowing wet leaves across the freshly mopped linoleum. The temperature in the diner seemed to drop 10 degrees instantly. Reese froze, the rag in her hand hovering over the counter. The boy stepped in front of the girl immediately, shielding her. His face was a map of grime. Smudges of dirt, grease, and something dark that looked like dried blood streaked his cheek. But his eyes were striking, piercingly blue, intelligent, and filled with a feral kind of alertness. He scanned the room, checking the exits, checking Ed in the back, checking Arthur at the grill. We need a table," the boy said. His voice was cracking, hovering between childhood and adolescence. Ed looked up from his money. He squinted, his heavy brows furrowing. He didn't see children. He saw liabilities. He saw mud on his floor. He saw non-paying loiterers. Kitchens closed. Ed barked, though the grill was clearly still hot. "Beat it." The girl flinched, shrinking behind her brother. She was clutching a dirty stuffed rabbit by the ear. She looked gray. Not pale, but gray. Her lips were blue. Ray's felt a sharp pang in her chest. It was the maternal instinct she had tried to suppress since her own miscarriage years ago. She dropped the rag and walked around the counter. "Ed, stop it," Ree said, her voice low. She turned to the boy. "The kitchen isn't closed. You guys sit anywhere you want." The boy looked at Ree, analyzing her. He was looking for the trap. Finding none, he nodded once and guided his sister to the booth furthest from the window, deep in the shadows. Ree grabbed 2 menus and a pitcher of water. Her hands were shaking slightly. As she approached the table, the smell hit her. It was the smell of damp wool, unwashed bodies, and the metallic tang of fear. "Here," Ree said, pouring 2 glasses of water. The girl grabbed hers with both hands and drained it in 3 seconds. Ray's immediately refilled it. "Take your time. It's warm in here." "We don't have much money," the boy said abruptly. He reached into the pocket of his soggy hoodie and pulled out a handful of change. He placed it on the table with a clatter. Quarters, Dimes, sticky pennies. We have $3.40. Ree looked at the pathetic pile of copper and silver. It wouldn't even cover a burger. I'm hungry, Leo, the little girl whispered. It was the first time she had spoken. Her voice was like dry leaves. I know, Mia. I know. The boy. Leo whispered back, pushing the wet hair out of her eyes. We'll get something. Ray's felt her heart breaking. She looked at the menu. The cheapest thing was the grilled cheese for $4.50. Fries were extra. I want the cheeseburger, Mia said, pointing at the picture. The cheeseburger platter was $8.95. Leo looked at the coins, then at the menu, then at Ree. His pride was fighting a war with his desperation. She'll have the grilled cheese, just the sandwich. I'm not hungry. His stomach growled, a loud, angry sound that echoed in the quiet booth. He flushed red, looking down at the table. Ree closed her eyes for a second. She thought about the pink envelope in her purse. She thought about the $14.50 in tips. If she covered their meal, she'd be going home with practically nothing. She wouldn't be able to buy gas to get to work tomorrow. She'd have to walk 3 miles in the rain. She looked at Mia's blue lips. She looked at Leo's protective hand over his sister's. You know what? Ray said, forcing a smile she didn't feel. You guys are in luck. It's 9 Tuesday. Tuesday is kids eat free night. Special promotion. Management's idea. Leo looked up, suspicious. I didn't see a sign. We just started it. Haven't put the sign up yet? Reese lied smoothly. You can have whatever you want. Burgers, fries, hot chocolate. Mia's eyes went wide. Hot chocolate with whipped cream. Double whipped cream, Ree promised. Hey. Ed's voice boomed across the diner. He was standing up now, waddling towards them. What are you doing, Ree? I heard that. There ain't no kids eat free night. Who do you think you are? Charity. Leo stiffened, sliding out of the booth to stand between Ed and Mia. He reached into his pocket again, and for a terrifying second, Ree thought he might have a weapon, but his hand just bowled into a fist. Ed stopped at the table, sneering at the coins. $3. That won't even cover the heat you're letting in. Get out now before I call the cops. And they are customers, Ed, Ree said, stepping in front of the table. She was 5'4" and Ed was 6'2", but she was fueled by a rage she hadn't felt in years. They are ordering food. They can't pay. I'm paying, Ree snapped. She reached into her apron, pulled out her entire night's tips, the crumpled ones and fives, and slammed them onto the table next to Leo's coins. There, that's $15. That covers 2 burger platters and 2 hot chocolates. Now go sit down and let me do my job. The diner went silent. Arthur, the cook, poked his head out of the kitchen, watching. Old man Jenkins stopped drinking his coffee. Ed stared at the money, then at Ree. His face turned a dangerous shade of purple. He swiped the money off the table, shoving it into his pocket. Fine, Ed spat. But if they make a mess, you're cleaning it with your toothbrush. And don't expect any more shifts this week, Ree. You just bought yourself a 3-day suspension. He turned and stomped back to his office, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the napkin holders. Ree stood there, breathing hard. She had just lost 3 days of pay. That was the rent money. That was the end. She was definitely getting evicted now. She turned back to the kids. Leo was staring at her with an intensity that was unsettling. He didn't look grateful. He looked shocked. "Why did you do that?" he asked quietly. "You don't know us." "I know you're hungry," Ree said, her voice trembling slightly. "Sit down. I'll get you hot chocolate." She went to the kitchen. Her hands shook as she scooped the cocoa powder. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Don't cry," she told herself. "Not in front of them." She brought out the food: massive burgers, piles of steaming fries, and mugs of cocoa overflowing with whipped cream. She watched them eat. It wasn't eating. It was inhaling. They ate with a frantic speed, as if the food might vanish if they stopped chewing. Mia got ketchup all over her face. Leo ate half his burger, then stopped, wrapped the other half in a napkin, and shoved it into his pocket. "Eat it all, honey," Ree said gently. "I can make you another one to go." Leo looked at her. "We can't pay you back. I didn't ask you to." They finished in 20 minutes. The rain had slowed to a drizzle outside. Leo stood up, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. He helped Mia down. "Thank you," Mia whispered, hugging Reese's leg. The girl smelled like rain and dirt, but under that the sweet scent of cocoa. Leo stood before her. He looked older now that he had eaten. He reached into his pocket. Reyes thought he was getting the wrapped burger, but instead he pulled out a small folded piece of paper. It looked like a page torn from a diary. "Take this," Leo said. He pressed it into her hand. "What is it?" "It's collateral," Leo said. He looked her dead in the eye. "My name is Leo Vance. This is my sister, Mia. We are going to find our aunt in Chicago. But I never forget a debt, ever." "Leo, it's just a burger." "It's not just a burger," he said fiercely. "You saved us. Nobody saves us." He grabbed Mia's hand. "Come on, Mia. We have to move before the blue car comes back." And just like that, they were gone. The bell jingled. The door swung shut, and Reese was left standing in the middle of the diner with a dirty table, an empty apron, and a suspension that would cost her her home. She looked down at the paper in her hand. It wasn't a diary page. It was a Polaroid photo, old and creased. It showed a beautiful woman standing next to a very distinct car, a vintage 1960s Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud. On the back, in messy handwriting, was written, "Property of the Vance Family Trust. If found, call 555-0199. She didn't call the number. She didn't think it was real. She tucked the photo into her pocket, finished her shift, and walked the 3 miles home in the rain. She lost her apartment 2 weeks later. 2010, 2019, the lost decade. The years that followed that rainy night in 2009 did not bring karma. They brought gravity, gravity that pulled everything in Reese's life downward. 2 weeks after feeding Leo and Mia, Ree was fired. Ed didn't even do it face to face. He left a note taped to her locker saying her services were no longer required due to theft. He called the free meal theft, without a reference, and with the economy crashing, Ree lost her apartment. She spent the winter of 2010 sleeping in her 1998 Ford Taurus, parked behind a Walmart. She learned the specific rhythm of homelessness, the art of washing your hair in McDonald's sinks, the way you layer 3 pairs of socks to keep your toes from turning blue, and the humiliating invisibility of standing in line at a food pantry when you used to be the one serving the food. By 2012, she scraped enough together to rent a studio, a converted garage with no insulation, on the outskirts of town. She got a job at Patty's Pancake House, a step down from the griddle. The uniforms were polyester and didn't breathe, and the tips were quarters, not dollars. Ree aged. It wasn't a graceful aging. It was an erosion. Her knees, punished by decades of concrete floors, began to swell permanently. The doctor at the free clinic called it severe osteoarthritis and recommended knee replacement surgery. He might as well have recommended a trip to the moon. The surgery cost $40,000. Reese had $400 in a coffee can under a sink. She started taking ibuprofen like candy, chewing 4 at a time just to get through a 6-hour shift. Through it all, she kept the Polaroid. It moved with her from the car to the garage, then to a basement apartment in 2015 that smelled of mold. She tacked it to a mirror. The image of the Rolls-Royce and the woman faded in the sunlight, turning sepia. The phone number on the back, 555-0199, remained uncalled. Sometimes late at night, when the pain in her legs kept her awake, she would talk to the picture. "I hope you made it to Chicago, Leo." She would whisper to the empty room, "I hope you got that hot chocolate." She never really believed the Vance family trust was real. She assumed it was a child's fantasy, a coping mechanism for a boy living on the streets. She kept the photo, not because she thought it was a lottery ticket, but because it was proof that she was a good person in a world that told her she was trash. That photo was evidence that she had once saved someone. 2020, the breaking point. Then came the pandemic for the world. It was a tragedy for Ree. It was a death sentence. Patty's Pancake House closed its doors in March 2020, just for 2 weeks. They said it never reopened. Ray's was 60 years old. She had no computer skills, no savings, and a bad back. She applied for unemployment, but the system was clogged. Checks were lost. Delay followed delay. She burned through her meager savings in 3 months. She stopped buying meat. She stopped buying fresh vegetables. Her diet became rice, beans, and discounted bread. She found odd jobs. She cleaned houses for people who were afraid to let her inside, scrubbing their floors while wearing a mask that made it hard to breathe. She walked dogs for wealthy families in the Heights, dragging her painful legs up and down hills for $10 an hour. It wasn't enough. By 2023, she had moved to a dilapidated rental house on Miller Road. It was a shack, really, rotten wood siding, a roof that leaked into buckets when it rained, and a porch that leaned dangerously to the left. But the rent was $600, and the landlord, a slum lord named Mr., didn't ask for a credit check. She was surviving just barely. She was like a swimmer treading water in the middle of the ocean, waiting for her muscles to finally give out. Present day, October 15th, 2024. The end didn't come with a bang. It came with a certified letter. Ree sat on her porch, the only part of the house that felt somewhat peaceful, staring at the paper in her hand. The autumn wind stripped the leaves off the oak tree in the yard, sending them skittering across the cracked concrete. Notice to vacate. Mr. Gorski had sold the land. A developer was coming in to bulldoze the row of shacks and build luxury condos. The Miller Road Lofts, they would be called. She had 72 hours. Ree looked at her hands. They were gnarled now, the skin paper thin, spotted with age and hard work. She was 64 years old. 72 hours, she said aloud. Her voice sounded rusty. She had nowhere to go. The car was long gone, sold for scrap 2 years ago when the transmission died. She had no family. Her parents were dead. And she had no children. She had no friends. Poverty is isolating, and she had been too ashamed to keep in touch with anyone from her old life. She stood up, and her left knee buckled. She grabbed the railing to steady herself, biting her lip to keep from crying out. The pain was a sharp, hot knife twisting in the joint. She limped into the house. It was sparse. A mattress on the floor in the corner, a card table with one chair, a hot plate, and a stack of cardboard boxes she had scavenged from the liquor store down the street. She began to pack. It didn't take long. When you have nothing, packing is quick. She packed her 3 shirts, her 2 pairs of pants, her Bible, the ceramic cat figurine her mother had given her, and then she came to the mirror. Tucked into the frame was the photo. It was curled at the edges now, stained with humidity. She took it down. She looked at the handwriting on the back. "Leo, Mia, I'm sorry, kids," she whispered. "I guess I'm the one who needs saving now." She thought about throwing it away. What was the point? It was a reminder of a life she had lost. If she hadn't given away that money, if she hadn't stood up to Ed, maybe things would have been different. Maybe she would have kept her job. Maybe she would be a manager by now. But as she hovered over the trash bag, she couldn't do it. She tucked the photo into her pocket right next to her inhaler. October 17th, 2024, the final afternoon. The deadline was 5 p.m. It was 4:15 p.m. Reese sat on the front steps, her 2 boxes beside her. The house was empty. The keys were on the counter inside. She had a plan of sorts. There was a shelter downtown, the Samaritan House. If she started walking now, she could get there by nightfall. But she knew the rule. First come, first served. If the beds were full, she would be on the street. It was starting to rain again, a cold, miserable drizzle, just like that night in 2009. Ree closed her eyes. She felt a heavy, crushing weight on her chest. It wasn't a heart attack. It was despair, pure, unadulterated despair. She had worked hard every single day of her life. She had been kind, she had been honest, and this was her reward, sitting on a rotting porch, waiting to become a statistic. Maybe I should just stay here, she thought. Let them bulldoze it with me inside. It was a dark thought, but it felt comforting. The struggle was so hard, she was so tired. Then she heard it. It wasn't the sound of a normal car. Most cars on Miller Road were rusted sedans or pickup trucks with bad mufflers that rattled and popped. This sound was different. It was a low, powerful purr, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated in her chest. It sounded like a lion clearing its throat. Ree opened her eyes. Turning the corner onto a muddy, pothole-ridden street was a vehicle that looked like it had driven out of a movie screen. It was black. Not just black, but a black. So deep it seemed to absorb the light around it. It was massive, with a front grille that looked like the entrance to a bank vault. The spirit of ecstasy hood ornament gleamed silver against the gray sky. A Rolls-Royce Phantom. It moved slowly, prowling down the street, dodging the potholes with an eerie grace. It looked alien against the backdrop of peeling paint and chain-link fences. Ray's watched, mesmerized. Drug dealers, she thought, or maybe the developers coming to inspect their new land. The car slowed down. It crept past the house next door. Then the turn signal flashed. Reese held her breath. The massive car turned into her driveway. The tires crunched over the broken concrete. It stopped 10 feet away from her porch. The engine cut, and the silence that followed was heavy. Reyes didn't move. She couldn't. She gripped the handle of a cardboard box so hard her knuckles turned white. The back door of the car opened. A driver in a suit didn't get out. Instead, a young man stepped out from the rear passenger seat. He was tall, well over 6 feet. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit that fit him perfectly, tailored to broad shoulders. He wore a long black overcoat against the rain. He had dark hair, slicked back, and a sharp, angular jawline. He looked powerful. He looked wealthy. He looked like he owned the entire city. He opened a black umbrella, shielding himself from the rain. He walked towards the porch, his dress shoes splashing heedlessly into a mud puddle. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked up at Ree. Ree looked into his eyes, and the breath left her lungs. They were blue, piercing, intelligent, striking blue eyes. The same eyes that had scanned the diner for exits 15 years ago. The man didn't smile. He looked at the boxes next to her. He looked at the eviction notice taped to the door. A muscle in his jaw twitched. Then he reached into his pocket. Ree thought he was going to pull out a wallet. Instead, he pulled out a small, tattered object wrapped in plastic. He slowly unwrapped it to reveal a dry, half-eaten cheeseburger bun, petrified by time, hard as a rock. He held it up. "I believe," the man said, his voice deep and smooth, "that I still owe you for the other half of this." Ree stood up, a hand flying to her mouth. "Leo." The man finally smiled. It wasn't the guarded, terrified smile of the boy in the hoodie. It was a smile of triumph. "Hello, Ree," Leo said. "I brought the car, just like I promised." October 17th, 2024, 4:30 p.m. The rain drummed rhythmically against the roof of the Rolls-Royce Phantom. But inside, the silence was absolute. The car was a sanctuary of hand-stitched leather and walnut wood, smelling faintly of expensive cologne and new money. Ree sat in the back seat, stunned. Her dirty cardboard boxes were in the trunk. Her hands, rough and trembling, rested on the softest leather she had ever touched. Leo Vance sat across from her, his long legs crossed. He opened a crystal decanter from a hidden compartment and poured a glass of water. "Drink," he said gently. "You look like you're in shock." Ree took the glass, her teeth clattered against the rim. "Lo, I don't understand. The car? The suit? How?" Leo's face softened. The sharp corporate mask he wore for the world slipped away, revealing the boy who had once guarded his sister in a diner booth. "It's a long story, Ree, but we have time. Finally, we have time." He leaned forward. "Do you remember the name on the back of the photo?" "The Vance Family Trust." Reese nodded, patting her pocket where the photo still rested. "It wasn't a fantasy," Leo said, his voice hardening. "My father was Richard Vance. He owned Vance Logistics, one of the largest shipping companies in the Midwest. We lived in a mansion in Shaker Heights. We had everything. But in 2008, my parents died in a private plane crash." Ree gasped. "Oh, Leo, I'm so sorry." "That wasn't the worst part," Leo continued, his blue eyes darkening. "The worst part was my Uncle Marcus. He was the executive of the estate. He was supposed to care for us until I turned 25. Instead, he tried to erase us." Leo looked out the window at Reese's rotting porch. He wanted the trust fund, about $60 million, but he couldn't touch it as long as Mia and I were alive and in his care. So he hired a fixer to take us to a boarding school in remote Montana, a place for troubled youth. He was going to have us declared mentally incompetent. Ree felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp clothes she was wearing. "We ran," Leo said simply. "The night we came into your diner, we had been on the run for 3 weeks. We were hitchhiking, sleeping in barns, hiding in truck stops. We were starving, Ree, truly starving. We had been turned away from 3 restaurants before we found the griddle. One owner threatened to spray us with a hose. He looked at her intensely. When we walked into your diner, I had a knife in my pocket. I was ready to use it. I told myself that if anyone tried to hurt Mia, I would kill them. I was 12 years old, and I was ready to become a murderer." Ray's hand flew to her mouth. "Leo, but I didn't have to," Leo said softly. "Because you didn't see thieves. You didn't see trash. You saw children. You fed us. You stood up to that monster, Ed. And you gave us your own money." He reached into his inner suit pocket and pulled out a sleek black smartphone. He tapped the screen and turned it around to show Ree. It was a live video feed. A beautiful young woman in a white coat was walking down a hospital corridor. She looked confident, radiant. "Mia," Ree whispered. "Dr. Mia Vance," Leo corrected with a proud smile. "She's a pediatric surgeon at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. She saves kids every single day, and she does it because she remembers what it felt like to be helpless." Leo turned the phone off. "We made it to Chicago that week. We found our Aunt Catherine. She took us in, hired the best lawyers from Baker McKenzie, and fought my uncle for 5 years. We got everything back: the company, the house, the legacy. Uncle Marcus is currently serving 20 years in a federal prison for fraud and embezzlement." Ree wiped a tear from her cheek. "I'm so glad. I prayed for you every night." "We looked for you," Leo said, his voice filled with regret for years. "But we didn't know your last name. We only knew Ree. We went back to the griddle in 2012, but it was gone. Burned down in an insurance fire. Ed had disappeared. The records were destroyed. We hired private investigators, but without a surname or a social security number, it was impossible." "So, how?" Ray's gestured to the car. "How did you find me?" "The photo," Leo said. "Last month, I did an interview with Forbes magazine about my shipping empire. They asked me about my most prized possession. I told them about the Polaroid I gave to a waitress in Akron. I described it in detail. I described you." He paused. A nurse at the free clinic on 4th Street read the article. She remembered a patient with severe arthritis who carried an old Polaroid of a Rolls-Royce in her purse. "She called my office 3 days ago." Leo leaned back, his expression turning steely. "I flew in from London this morning. I came straight here, and I arrived just in time to see this." He pointed to the eviction notice on her door. "You're not homeless, Ree," Leo said firmly. "Not anymore. But before we leave, I have some business to attend to. October 17th, 2024, 4:55 p.m. A beat-up Ford F-150 rattled down the street and screeched to a halt behind the Rolls-Royce. The door swung open, and a man stepped out. It was Mr. Gorski, the landlord. He was a thick-set man in a stained windbreaker smelling of stale cigar smoke. He was followed by 2 younger men in work boots. hired muscle to clear out the trash. Gorski stared at the Rolls-Royce, his jaw dropping. He looked at the chauffeur standing stoically by the door. Then he looked at Reese's porch. "Hey!" Gorski shouted, marching up the driveway. "Whose car's this? You blocking the driveway? I got work to do here." Leo opened the car door and stepped out. He didn't use the umbrella this time. He let the rain hit his expensive suit, unbothered. He stood a full head taller than Gorski. "Mr. Gorski, I presume," Leo said. His voice was calm, but it carried a terrifying weight. Gorski faltered, intimidated by the sheer aura of wealth radiating from Leo. "Yeah, who are you? You a lawyer for the old lady? Look, the eviction is legal. She's out. 5 p.m. That's the law." Ree stepped out of the car, standing behind Leo. She felt small, but for the first time in years, she didn't feel afraid. "The law," Leo repeated, testing the word. "You seem to care a great deal about the law, Mr. Gorski, which is interesting considering the state of this property." Lau pulled a folded document from his coat. "I had my team pull the city records on this address while I was en route. No certificate of occupancy since 2018. Multiple citations for black mold, faulty wiring, lead paint exposed. You've been collecting rent illegally on a condemned building for 6 years." Gorski's face turned red. "Now listen here, rich boy." "No, you listen." Leo stepped closer, invading Gorski's space. "My name is Leo Vance. I own Vance Global Logistics. I have a team of 12 corporate attorneys who are currently bored. If you touch one single item of Reese's belongings, I will sue you not just for the illegal rent, but for reckless endangerment, emotional distress, and fraud." Gorski took a step back. I sold the place anyway. The developers are taking it tomorrow." "Actually, they aren't," Leo said, his smile razor sharp. He snapped his fingers. His chauffeur, a man named Thomas, stepped forward and handed Leo a thick folder. "I bought the development contract an hour ago," Leo said, tossing the folder onto the wet hood of Gorski's truck. "I paid a premium. The Miller Road Lofts project is canceled. I now own this land. I own this house. And effectively, Mr. Gorski, I own you." Gorski looked at the folder, then at Ree. He looked like a deflated balloon. "You bought the whole block for her." "For her," Leo said. "Now get in your truck. If I see you on this street again, I'll have your rental license revoked in every county in Ohio. Go." Gorski scrambled backward, tripping over his own feet. He signaled to his 2 men, who were already backing away. They jumped into the Ford and peeled away, tires spinning in the mud, fleeing the judgment of the Rolls-Royce. Ree stood on the wet pavement, rain mingling with the tears on her face. She looked at the rotting house that had been her prison. "What are you going to do with it?" she asked. "Burn it down," Leo said with satisfaction. "I'm going to bulldoze this shack and build a community center here, a place where kids can get a free meal without anyone asking questions. We'll call it the Reese Miller Center." Ree shook her head, overwhelmed. "Leo, I can't. This is too much. And Selin, I'm just a waitress." Leo turned to her, grabbing her hands. His grip was warm and strong. "You are not just a waitress. You are the woman who saved my life for $6. You invested in me when the whole world wrote me off. Now I'm paying out the dividends." He opened the back door of the Rolls-Royce again. "Get in, Ree. We have a flight to catch." "A flight to Baltimore," Leo said. Mia is waiting. She's cooked dinner, and I believe she promised you a hot chocolate with double whipped cream. Ree looked back one last time at the street where she had almost died of loneliness. Then she looked at the man who had returned from the past to save her. Okay, she whispered. Let's go. As the car pulled away, sliding silently through the rain, Reese Miller left her poverty behind forever. But the story wasn't quite over, because Leo Vance had one more stop to make. A stop that would bring the story full circle to the man who had started it all. Big Ed, October 17th, 2024, 5:45 p.m. The Rolls-Royce didn't head straight to the airport. Instead, it wound through the darkening streets of Akron, moving away from the suburbs and into a gray industrial district. Where are we going? Ree asked, wiping the rain from her face with a warm towel Leo had provided. One loose end, Lau said, his face unreadable. I told you I did my research. I found everyone, including Edward Kowalski. Ree stiffened. Ed? Is he still alive? He is, but life hasn't been kind to him. The car pulled up to a drab brick building surrounded by a high chain-link fence. The sign out front had peeling letters. Sunnyvale State Assisted Living Facility. It looked nothing like the sun and very little like living. It was a warehouse for the forgotten. Why are we here? Ree asked. Because I bought this place this morning, Leo said calmly, adjusting his cufflinks. The conditions were deplorable. Understaffed, underfunded, hygienic violations. I'm going to renovate it, hire real nurses, and improve the food. But there is one resident I wanted you to see. They walked inside. The smell hit Ree instantly. Ammonia, boiled cabbage, and despair. It was the smell of poverty she knew too well. In the recreation room, a dozen elderly people sat in wheelchairs, staring blankly at a flickering television. In the corner, sitting alone at a card table, was a man. He was withered now, his massive bulk reduced to sagging skin and bones. He was bald, his face spotted with age, but the skull was unmistakable. It was Big Ed. He was shouting at a nurse who was trying to take his blood pressure. Get off me. I didn't ask for this. Where's my dinner? I've been waiting 20 minutes. The nurse looked exhausted. Mr. Kowalski, please calm down. Don't tell me to calm down. I used to run a business. I was a boss. Ed spat, his voice raspy but still venomous. Reese approached the table slowly, her cane clicking on the linoleum. Leo walked beside her, a silent shadow. Hello, Ed, Reese said. Ed stopped shouting. He squinted, his roomy eyes trying to focus. He looked at Reese's clothes. She was still wearing her worn-out thrift store jacket, but then he looked up at Leo, the tall man in the $5,000 suit. Who are you? Ed grunted. You the new administrator? The food here is garbage. I am the new owner, Leo said and the food will improve for everyone. Ed looked back at Ree. Recognition flickered in his eyes. Ree? Ray's Miller? It's me, Ed. Ed let out a Waisen laugh. Well, look at you. You look terrible. Told you you'd amount to nothing without me. You here to apply for a bed? Good luck. Waiting list is a mile long. He was still the same. Bitter, cruel, unrepentant. Leo stepped forward, placing a hand on the table. The gold Rolex on his wrist caught the light. She isn't here for a bed, Mr. Kowalski. She's here to say goodbye. She is leaving to live with me and my sister. Ed looked confused. Sister? Who are you? My name is Leo Vance, Leo said, leaning down so his face was level with Ed's. 15 years ago, my little sister and I walked into your diner. We were starving. We had $3. You tried to kick us out into the rain. You called us trash. Ed's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The memory seemed to surface. The rain, the kids, the argument. Ray's paid for our meal, Leo continued, his voice hard as steel. She gave us her tips. She saved us. And because she saved us, I survived. I built a company. I became a billionaire. The word hung in the air. Billionaire. Ed looked at Leo, then at Ree. The color drained from his face. He looked at the Rolls-Royce visible through the window. You, Ed stammered. You're that kid? I am, Leo said. And Ree is the only reason you aren't being evicted from this facility right now. I wanted to throw you out on the street, just like you wanted to do to us. I wanted you to feel the cold. Leo straightened up. But Ree told me in the car that she forgives you. She said, you are a sad, lonely old man, and that punishment enough is being you? Ray's looked at Ed. She didn't feel anger anymore. She just felt pity. Goodbye, Ed, Ree said softly. I hope you find some peace. She turned and walked away. Wait, Ed called out, his voice cracking. Ray, wait, I didn't mean it, Rays. But she didn't turn back. She walked out of the smell of ammonia and into the fresh, cold rain where the luxury car was waiting to take her home. October 17th, 2024, 9 p.m. The flight was a blur of comfort Ree couldn't have imagined. A private Gulfstream jet, a hot meal served on china, a seat that turned into a bed. When they landed in Baltimore, a limousine was waiting on the tarmac. They drove for 30 minutes to a gated estate in the countryside. The house was massive. A sprawling Georgian manor lit up against the night sky. But it wasn't the size that mattered to Ree. It was the person standing on the front steps. A young woman stood there. She had the same dark hair as Leo, but her face was softer. She was wearing a thick wool sweater and jeans. She wasn't wearing shoes. She had run out in her socks. The car stopped. Ree got out. Mia. The woman burst into tears and ran down the steps. She collided with Ree, wrapping her arms around her in a hug so tight it threatened to crack Reese's ribs. You're here. Mia sobbed into Reese's shoulder. You're actually here. Rays held her. She smelled the same clean soap and rain. But she wasn't a shivering child anymore. She was a strong, beautiful woman. I found you, Ree whispered, crying freely now. I always wondered. We never forgot, Mia said, pulling back to look at her. Not for a single day. Look, Mia pulled a necklace from under her sweater. Hanging from the gold chain was a small, cheap plastic charm, a tiny hamburger. It came with the kids' meal. Mia laughed through her tears. I kept it. It was my lucky charm through medical school. Leo walked up beside them, smiling. I think we should go inside. It's freezing. They walked into the house. It was warm. A fire was crackling in the massive stone fireplace. And there on the coffee table was a silver tray. On the tray were 3 mugs. They were oversized, steaming, and piled high, impossibly high, with whipped cream. Double whipped cream, Mia said, wiping her eyes. Just like you promised. Ree sat down on the velvet sofa. She took a sip. It was sweet, warm, and perfect. The pain in her knees seemed to fade away. The fear of the eviction notice, the hunger, the loneliness, it all dissolved in the sugar and the warmth. She looked at Leo sitting in the armchair. She looked at Mia sitting on the rug at her feet. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She wasn't a charity case. She was family. Reese Miller didn't just survive, she thrived. With access to top-tier medical care, she got her knee replacement surgery. She spent 3 months in physical therapy, and for the first time in 20 years, she could walk without pain. She didn't want to just sit around in a mansion, though. Leo tried to tell her she never had to work again, but Race was stubborn. She took over the kitchen of the estate. She didn't cook for the family. They had a chef for that. But she started baking. She baked cookies, pies, and her famous apple strudel. Every Sunday, she and Mia would load up the SUV and drive to the local children's shelter. They didn't just drop off food, they served it. Ray stood behind the counter, not as a servant, but as a grandmother figure to 100 kids who had no one else. Leo kept his promise, too. The Reese Miller Community Center opened in Akron on the site of her old shack. It provides 500 free meals a day. Above the door is a plaque that reads, "Kindness is the only investment that never fails." Ray's often sits on the patio of the manor looking at the sunset. She still keeps the Polaroid of the Rolls-Royce in her wallet, right next to a new picture. A photo of her, Leo and Mia laughing at a graduation ceremony. She realized that the luxury car wasn't the reward. The money wasn't the reward. The reward was the love that came back to her, multiplied 1,000 times over, proving that even in a dark, rainy world, a simple grilled cheese sandwich can still save a life. And that is the incredible story of Reese Miller. It reminds us that no act of kindness, no matter how small, is ever truly wasted. Reese gave everything she had, her last few dollars, and her job to help 2 strangers, never expecting a dime in return. 15 years later, the universe paid her back in a way she could never have imagined. It makes you wonder, how many miracles are we creating right now, just by being kind to the people around us? If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button. It really helps us share these positive messages with more people. And if you believe in the power of karma, type "kindness matters" in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that inspires. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next.